Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It's a Friday in early October 2021. Hope everybody's doing well today. The great Jimmy Gandolfini, Tony Soprano, the greatest acting performance I've ever seen. A lot of great actors out there, a lot of great performances out there, but the length of The Sopranos, 80 some episodes, really allowed for him to illustrate his complete range as an actor. And I can't think of a performance I've ever witnessed where a guy was able to embody more of the emotional landscape than what Tony does in The Sopranos. That prequel movie just came out, Many Saints in Newark, and race is a big part of that. You really see the riots in Newark in some detail. You see the crime that drives minorities, the poverty that drives minorities into crime. The black experience in Newark was part of the impetus for the white flight, and even the Italians were very resentful of the blacks moving into their neighborhoods, even though these blacks who were moving into these neighborhoods were becoming upperly mobile doctors and more upper class in terms of coming from poverty in the ghetto. They were trying to become middle-class Americans, and they weren't really welcomed even by other minorities like the Italians and the Jews. And the Jews and the Italians were quick to flee Newark, and the Newark tax base bottoms out, and the city really descends into some of the great poverty of the 20th century in America. Great urban decay, the tax base and the services disappear, the police force doesn't have the funding. It's really an interesting thing. I've talked about it before with the Savoy record label, which was in Newark. Of course, those different various groups that made Newark were all part of the interesting story that makes jazz and the music of this era so compelling, is the race that's underlying all of it and the unity that jazz and music can bring. The Sopranos prequel was good. I wouldn't say it was awesome, but it was good. The show was awesome. But it was still very interesting to see the honesty in how they talked about race in the show. They didn't really sugarcoat it. When Johnny Soprano gets out of jail, who was Tony's dad in the original series, he's super upset at his wife because a black's now living on the block, which of course isn't his wife's fault or his uncle's fault either, but it's interesting to see that dynamic at play. And during that whole time, jazz was happening, and a lot of the jazz music we love was being percolated in Newark and other parts of northern New Jersey, and of course Hackensack and Rudy Van Gelder and all the great New York players. So there's interesting links there. You do hear some jazz in the show, which is great, in the Many Saints in Newark, but it's just an important thing to grasp. Another thing I want to touch on briefly, this isn't really jazz related. It is loosely, because marijuana, cannabis, hemp, the plant's always been a big part of the jazz community. The herbal jazz cigarette, as they said. Louis Armstrong always smoked weed every day of his life, against a lot of people's advice. A lot of guys chose herb over the bottle. The bottle makes you more volatile, more unpredictable, more likely to get arrested as a black man. You know, you can get arrested smoking a joint, but it's much easier to maintain your behavior and not draw attention to yourself. And so a lot of guys chose herb for that reason. And one of the things I want to talk about real quick is herb, marijuana, which is a slang term. You know, cannabis is really a much more effective name. There's something that's never really mentioned, even in the pro-marijuana, pro-cannabis documentaries I watch. And it's something I've followed closely for 30 years. I never smoked cigarettes in my life, but I found out that cannabis helped me with my asthma, and it's changed my life. It really helps me clear out my bronchioles, and it helps them expunge the dirt, the pollen, the dust, the things that would help keep me in bed during the day as a kid, and help me live and breathe and function much more like a normal person would. But even in all the pro-cannabis documentaries I've watched, one thing I never heard mentioned, and it just kind of really doesn't sit well with me, is, archaeologically speaking, there's evidence that this is one of the first crops we cultivated when we became civilized. One of the things that defines civilization is a food surplus. And a food surplus is a byproduct of irrigation. And irrigation was this huge step to guaranteeing there being a crop, to guarantee there would be food grain in the storage so that we could make it through to the next year or even through a couple years. A surplus of grain was a very important thing. Irrigation makes that happen. And most of these settlements that we're talking about, these early civilizations, were in quite arid, desert, subtropical conditions. Whether you're talking Indus River or the Tigris Euphrates or the Nile, these places, you don't have to go too far away from those rivers to find a lot of sand, a lot of unarable land. And it was irrigation between the Tigris and the Euphrates, on the Nile River, in the Indus River, in China. It was irrigation that made these crops a guaranteed commodity. And that allows for leisure time for us to develop the sciences and the arts. The gods, the religions, the pillars, the architecture, the astronomy, all that stuff is a byproduct of leisure time. If I'm so busy collecting grapes, berries, and dead rabbits to feed myself for the next couple days, there's never time for me to sit around and question the cosmos. It's luxury of free time that allows all those arts to exist. And so it's a huge stepping stone, irrigation. And all the evidence that I've been collecting for years shows cannabis, sativa, indica is something that we harvested and cultivated as early as 15, 18, 20,000 years ago. And that's a huge, huge thing. We cultivated corn, the natives did for centuries before us. We got the corn from the natives 500 years ago, and we've changed corn dramatically. And the things corn can now do has grown rapidly with its symbiotic partnership with us. It's evolving, and we're training it to do things better than it's done before, every year, every generation. There's a symbiotic relationship with our plants that we grow. Cannabis, hemp, being one of the first crops that we ever cultivated, is the only explanation we need to understand the versatility of this crop. All the things that it does, not just okay, but really well, and also wax illegal. I think it's such a huge fulcrum, such a huge thing to grasp. The first crop we cultivated and started training to suit our purposes, to make better fiber, to make better rope, to make better medicines, to make better oils and tinctures and food elements. The seed has all the nutrients we need to live on. The plant, the leaf has 5 fingers like us. Our entire body is filled with a cannabinoid system that has receptors that are meant for THC and CBD and these different things for us to heal ourselves, to release our tensions and our stresses and our strains. It was originally called a gift from the gods, I think by the Hindus. It's just such an ancient crop. And that partnership with us explains everything. Everything. And it's why it was made illegal, because it was a valuable, renewable resource that we didn't have the resources to harvest once slavery was abolished. With slavery, we could, for free, harvest a difficult to harvest crop. But once we had no slavery, we had to pay people to harvest it, and the cost per acre skyrockets. And it kind of goes out of use industrially in a lot of ways. It gets brought back during the World War, and it was always used by the colonial people. It was always used by pretty much every people throughout time. It's been a part of human evolution. Explains a lot. Explains why it does everything it does so well. And like I said, it also explains why it was banned. This wasn't just some crop that was going to impact one sector or one commodity. It was going to impact everything and redistribute wealth. You're putting this crop that's a valuable renewable resource in the hands of the poor. You're giving them potential energy sources, food sources, clothing, textile sources, paper sources. The list is endless of what this plant can do. And I don't think it's any coincidence. There was a great book by Jack Herrera, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, talking about the abolishment of this plant. And even as a biomass fuel, it's so much more efficient per acre than corn. And corn makes a decent ethanol, but the fuel that we can get from a hemp crop, it would be so much more valuable per acre because it grows so much more. Big, bushy, tall plants that break down into a lot of fuel versus that single thin corn stalk. They've made concrete hemp buildings that are impermeable. You can't destroy them. It's such an interesting aspect of this argument, and one that I never hear presented, even in the pro-cannabis documentaries. Why does no one mention that symbiotic evolution? And the thing about symbiosis is if we evolve together to mutually benefit each other, we also cannot be harmful to each other. It's just part of that relationship. I'm evolving to suit your needs. I'm not also evolving to harm you. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. And I just think it's something that I want some of y'all to think and ponder on. And does someone have anything to say to oppose that thought process? I don't see how it can be wrong. The archaeological record is there. We've changed the cow from a small milk-producing udder to this giant, huge udder that makes milk for humans 5 times its own needs. We can breed and select things and change their patterns and their behaviors and how they interact with us so dramatically through natural selection, through artificial selection. How can this crop that dates back to the dawn of irrigation, how can this crop not be the answer to so much of what's wrong? And how does it not explain why it does everything so well? How does it not explain why it's illegal? Plastics, we don't need them. Hemp can do that. Cannabis can heal us. It's such an important... There's even like the tetrahydrocannabinol, like the compounds within the plant itself, there's over 200 compounds. That's another pretty clear indicator of who that plant has been evolving with. It's one of the most complex organisms that we know of, humanity. And of course, jazz and pot have always been very interwoven. So I'm going to move on. Enough on that. First thing I want to talk about is the great Lockjaw Eddie Davis. And I just recently got this record here that we're listening to. And this is 1956 on the King label. And he starts off early on, does some sessions at Roost. This is a great little 10-inch on the Roost label. Goodies from Eddie Davis. It's a pretty tough piece to find. I was pretty excited when I found it. But then he moves on quite quickly to King. And King was out of Cincinnati, but they also had a large office in Chicago, right along with a lot of the other great Chicago labels. Were all in a similar little area. Me and Scott Baldwin talked about that recently. And Eddie Davis, to me, is one of the great indicators of what jazz is that most people today miss. So many people today in jazz circles want that complexity, that avant-gardism, that complex arrangements and compositions. Eddie was never a trained player. He had not a day of learning in his life. I don't know if he even did a whole lot of composing, but he plays what he feels off his cuff, off his sleeve, with such an honest, open integrity. He's always got something to talk about. He's a black man in America. There's things going on. I can always put my horn to my lips and tell you about something. And it might just be how cute that jelly roll was last night. Or I might get a little deeper on you. I might have to go somewhere else because the riots in Newark last night stirred my soul. But Eddie Davis is the essence of jazz. It's not this intellectual property. It's an emotional property. It's venting your experience, venting your personality and how you interact with all the things in your life. And to me, Lockjaw is one of the great players that illustrates that sound. He played with Basie's group for a while, and of course Basie's group is one of the great proving grounds in the 50s and 60s, into the 70s and 80s even. The Basie Orchestra is such an important university for young jazz players. And Basie picked cats right out of high school even, you know. And Lockjaw was such an institution, playing with some of those great Basie orchestras. And when he starts going out in the zone, a lot of it's with the great Shirley Horn. Did I say that right? The organ player? Shirley Scott, not Shirley Horn. Shirley Scott, the great organ player. He makes a lot of records with her. he's just such a fantastic player talking from his soul. And if you just close your ears and listen at times to a guy like Lockjaw, and of course he makes 5 records at King before he moves on to Prestige, where he makes 30 records between the late 50s into the mid 60s, and it's such an impressive body of work, and it's all blues based, black church infused, elements of soul jazz. It's the coolest, bluesiest, most honest, least cluttered, least counterfeit. It doesn't have a lot of posturing. It's not trying to be something ever that it's not. And it's not something that many of the white players ever try to emulate. Just a guy blowing. But he's not just blowing nonsense or ego like, look at me, ever. It never sounds like a guy going, look at my notes I can throw in it. I don't think he ever does that. In fact, when he plays a lot with Johnny Griffin, when he's playing with Johnny Griffin is the guy who's playing all the notes, and then Lockjaw comes in going, yo, it's a cool day, and I got a little bit of blues on my mind. I'm going to tell you how I feel, because it feels good to be alive, because Jelly Roll is coming over at 5. Like, he's just got an essence that's content with food, sex, love, music, and I just love it. It's such a great cover, by the way. I'm not sure who does the cover. It's got a bit of a David Stone Martin look to it, but it definitely screams 50s. But to me, that's as beautiful a cover as the King label ever did. I'm going to show you his other stuff on King. And these are all pretty tough to come by. This was 506. This is actually his first one on King. Tough to find. The one I'm just playing right now is number 526. So I believe it was second. Then third would be 566. Eddie Lockjaw Davis, Jazz with a Beat. Outstanding album cover once again. Most of the stuff's going to be trio quartet settings. The essence of black jazz music. None of that need to be innovative. This vehicle is all I need to get where I'm going. Eddie Lockjaw Davis, The Big Beat Jazz, number 599, with a blue teddy bear. It's a beautiful, beautiful record. Incredible playing. And I think some of us see Lockjaw Davis's records for $20 and go, those can't be any good. But it's because they sold well. His records on Prestige sold really well for jazz at that time. These King records are much tougher to come by. This is Eddie Davis, Uptown, number 606. And so those are his 5 records on King. This is also on King, This and That, Eddie Davis and his tenor sax. And this is actually a reissue of the record we're listening to, which I found it that way first before I could find this one. This one was really hard to find. So those are the 5 Eddie Davis Lockjaw records on King. Outstanding records, and they really fill a powerful, important niche in the evolution of jazz. It's not trying too hard. It's not forcing itself on us. It's just being. And we talk about the cool and West Coast cool. In some ways, there's nothing cooler than the great Eddie Lockjaw Davis. Having said that, I'm going to delve into another aspect of the cool. And that's what Blue Note was doing. And I talk a lot about Blue Note. I talk a lot about Blue Note for good reason. And Blue Note, as I've told you many times, has a sound, quote unquote, in the late 1500 sequence, which runs from 56 through 58, where the Blue Note sounds this. Hard, aggressive, just really up-tempo. It's hard bop, crystallized. The innovations of the great Clifford Brown, Max Roach Quintet, Blue Note quantifies it with an aggression and a rehearsed sound that's tight, clean, precise, still grooves. You can still tap your foot to it at all times. It's never too dissonant, but it's certainly aggressive. It's certainly filled with a compulsion and a drive and a voice. And that sound at Blue Note was kind of universal at Blue Note in the 1500 sequence. Even the great Lou Donaldson, who we're going to talk about here, 1591, he's doing this record here, which is hard bop. And part of this is because Donald Byrd, Curtis Fuller, Sonny Clark, Art Taylor, George Joyner. It's a driving group. Sonny Clark's at the helm, and Sonny Clark is going to make a propulsed, hard driving sound. He's a very kind of essence of what hard bop is, as I've said many times. But even, like I said, Lou Donaldson in the 1500 sequence has kind of gone from the bebop school into the hard bop school, and he's playing that Blue Note sound. And then he kind of migrates away from it, and he moves on. He moves on to what you could only call the Lou Donaldson Cool, the Blue Note Cool. And this comes only a few records later, 1593. So essentially 2 records later in that sequence. But this is night and day different from Lou Donaldson Takes Off. And the group here is much different as compared to what that last record was. You have Herman Foster, one of the great piano players of this time, Peck Morrison on bass, Dave Bailey, and Ray Barretto on the congos. All right. And what this does is it helps set the tone for the new Blue Note sound. And there's really 2 new sounds at Blue Note once that hard bop era kind of comes to an end. And there's still elements and traces of that hard bop Blue Note sound. But hard bop's era is really that late 50s moment. And then other developments start happening in jazz. The modal playing that's going on with George Russell and, of course, and Miles Davis and Bill Evans, that's interloping with hard bop, creating these new sounds that lead to some of the avant-garde that comes over to Blue Note. But if you want to know the Blue Note that Alfred Lyon was a huge fan of, it's the Blue Note Cool. And there's a lot of proponents of the Blue Note Cool. And what went from a very unified camp in 56, 57, 58 at Blue Note, with kind of one sound, split into 2 camps. And Alfred Lyon, I'm going to tell you right now, loves the cool sound more than the edgy sound of these other players. And the 2 camps can kind of be, I'm going to give you some players on both sides of that line. There's the Jazz Messenger School, which is taking some of that composition, some of that modal playing, some of that avant-gardism with just great, still aggressive tempos and furious volumes and propulsion. That's still happening at Blue Note, and they're pushing that out into new waves. And the players like Jackie McLean, the Jazz Messengers, Lee Morgan, Sonny Clark, Donald Byrd, Hank Mobley, Freddie Hubbard, those guys are all pushing that envelope. Wayne Shorter comes into the fold. Herbie Hancock comes into the fold. Grasham Moncour. That's that other trunk of the Blue Note sound. And from everything I've read and everything I've seen, everything I know, Alfred tolerated and moderated that stuff. And if something didn't swing, as he would say, he would kind of be like, let's do that again. Let's put a little more swing into that. Being the little German Jew that he was. Conversely, there was the stuff happening on the other trunk of the Blue Note sound, the Blue Note Cool, that from all I've read, Alfred was a huge proponent of and a fan of, and never ever interfered or had to moderate these sessions. And in fact, when some of these sessions went, things happened that were incorrect, he often just left them alone. Case in point, the Idle Moments, that song was supposed to be half as long as it was. They all ended up playing their breaks twice as long as they were supposed to, but it was such a great take that they put it on the record. 13 minutes, let's go, Idle Moments. This is great, leave it alone. Don't touch that, that's beautiful blues. That's Alfred Lyon. That's where Alfred Lyon's heart was. He was moderating what McLean was doing, what Mobley was doing, what Morgan was doing. He had to kind of organize that stuff. With the Cool, he's like, oh, you guys do what you do. Oh, you messed that up, that's okay, that's so awesome, let's leave it alone. Okay, and there's cats that are in the Blue Note Cool sound that sold well, which helped propel all the other more experimental artists and allowed them to continue doing what they were doing. And in that cool Blue Note sound, you have great artists like Grant Green, Jimmy Smith, the great Stanley Turrentine, Ike Quebec, the Three Sounds, to name some of the most prominent ones, and then of course Lou Donaldson. And to me, my favorite Lou Donaldson is 59 through 65. He makes 10 records here, starting with The Great Blues Walk, which the man signed for me. I saw him at the Dakota Jazz Club downtown Minneapolis back in 2003 or 4. The man could still fly through the changes of Cherokee like Clifford Brown. He was just amazing. He still had the bebop and the hard bop in him. But Lou was a cool cat. And he was a little older than a lot of the younger kids on the hard bop sound and the more avant-garde edges of Blue Note. He was an older cat from a different generation, more part of the hard bebop school. But even as Lou gets into his 40s, he's like, I want to be cool. I want to play something that I know my black brothers and sisters are going to love. And Lou is the definition of Blue Note Cool. And he makes 10 records here that I'm going to show you that to me are what Lou Donaldson and what Blue Note Cool are about. And you can throw Grant Green and Jimmy Smith and all the other organ players, Stanley Turrentine, all those guys can fit into this same shell. Lou Donaldson plus 3, which is Lou Donaldson with the 3 sounds. This is number 4012, so early, probably 59 in the 4000 sequence. Outstanding stuff. This is gold, metal, Blue Note Cool. And then shortly after that is a record I really love. This is with The Time Is Right. I played this the other day and I'm just like, man, I need to talk about the Blue Note, the Lou Donaldson Cool era. Because Lou Donaldson in 65 I think it is, he leaves for Argo Records in Chicago, where he makes 6 or 7 really good records there that are also kind of cool and infused with the Chicago blues sound. And they're somewhat different than the Blue Note Cool, but they're still great. And then when he comes back to Blue Note in 67, the Boogaloo thing has been what's dominating the charts for Blue Note. And so Alligator Boogaloo and all that Lush Life stuff kind of comes out then. And those records are fun, but they're not Blue Note Cool. They're not Lou Donaldson Cool. This has Blue Mitchell, Lou Donaldson, Horace Parlan, Layman Jackson on the bass, Dave Bailey on the drums, and Ray Barretto on the conga. And if you are at a record store and you're trying to remember, what were those Blue Note Cool records? The ones with the conga players, that's a great indicator that you got Lou Donaldson Cool. Outstanding record. You can follow that up right away with this record called Midnight Sun, which wasn't released. It was sat on. It didn't come out until much later. I think in the 80s it was finally released with that awful white cover. And this is a much later reissue. I think this is a Japanese cover. This also has Ray Barretto on the conga, Al Harwood, Horace Parlan, and Ben Tucker. It's Blue Note Cool. Lou Donaldson, Sunny Side Up, number 4036. This is with Bill Hardman on the trumpet. And you don't see Bill Hardman at Blue Note very often, but he's a great trumpet player, and he's really bringing something to this mix here. Then you have Horace Parlan, Sam Jones, Layman Jackson, and Al Harwood to round up that group. You see a lot of Harwood, Sam Jones, Layman Jackson, even Horace Parlan. I'm a big Horace Parlan guy. And Horace Parlan is another guy that's part of that Blue Note Cool. He's not stretching the boundaries. He's still playing within the frameworks of Basie and Ellington, but obviously in small groups. I love this cover. I love this group. This has Herman Foster, Jimmy Wormworth, Peck Morrison, and then again the great Ray Barretto. This is Lightfoot. Awesome cover. And let's hear a little bit of this real quick. This is fantastic. I could play this at my gigs all day long. And just once this drops in, it's Pink Panther cool. Are you ready for the Pink Panther? Are you ready for some noir? You ready for a rainy black and white image with a fire escape and a dame streaking down the alley? Lou encapsulates that sound so wonderfully in the Lou Cool era. Love this record. And like I said, you can't really go wrong with any of these Lou Cool. Here it is, 4066. So these all kind of come out in a few year span. This is with Grant Green, Babyface Willette, and Dave Bailey. Another fantastic cover. It looks like my man Lou might be giving the man $1. It's hard to really tell. A Foggy Day, the Watoosh Jump, Wild Whitney. It's Blue Note Cool. It's fantastic. And don't let all these internet chat people, jazz Facebook groups, the YouTube community dissuade you from what in most settings, this is what Alfred Lyon loved. You want to love Blue Note, you want to be close to what the Blue Note thing was, you should care what Alfred Lyon had to say. This is Alfred Lyon's bread and butter. He loved Jimmy Smith. And Jimmy Smith leaving was a gut punch. To Alfred Lyon, to Blue Note in general, it was a gut punch to Jimmy Smith. You know, Verve was a great opportunity when MGM took over Verve and allowed for that new Creed Taylor era to come into play. Going there was a good thing for him financially, but it wasn't a good thing for him artistically, and it certainly was a crippling blow to Blue Note because Jimmy Smith's records sold well. Gravy Train, number 4079. Another fantastic album cover. You get just that black feeling with Gravy Train. Lou Donaldson, Herman Foster once again, Ben Tucker, Dave Bailey, and Alec Dorsey is on the conga here, and you gotta love anything with conga on it. Gravy Train's an outstanding record. And these aren't the records you're gonna see the Tone Poets reissuing very much, because the Tone Poet stuff is more focused on the rare, hard to find titles. The stuff that didn't sell well, the stuff that wasn't issued, that's what Tone Poet's kind of focusing on. The stuff that sold well, like Three Sounds, like Jimmy Smith, like Lou Donaldson, they're not really promoting that stuff or needing even to put it out there because there's copies of it out there. And a lot of these records have been reissued a lot. Blue Note, compared to some of these jazz labels, Blue Notes have been reissued almost non-stop by different labels throughout the world for decades. And so finding Gravy Train should never be that hard for anyone. Finding an original Gravy Train, that's a bit of a different story. But Lou Donaldson's records don't fetch what Hank Mobley's or Lee Morgan's records do, in part because they sold 3 times as well. And Lou is something that the black community loved. He sold, and his 45s got into jukeboxes. Lou Donaldson, The Natural Soul, 4108. This is with Tommy Turntine. And Tommy is Stanley's brother on the trumpet. And Tommy's actually a pretty bright, intense player. But he's actually playing some cool here with Grant Green, John Patton, and Ben Dixon. And when you're playing with Grant Green and Ben Dixon and John Patton and Lou Donaldson, Tommy Turntine knows I gotta put my cool hat on. You know what I mean? I gotta play some sweet, sugary melancholy. If you like atmosphere, if you like something that you can tap your foot to and nod your head and embrace people in the room, have them say, oh, I love this. Cool Lou, Big Lou Boyle, that's the stuff you want. This is good gracious, and that's flirtatious. And I love that album cover. You had to take a look as you walk by because there's some junk in that trunk. And he's saying, good gracious, that's some business. That is some business, honey. And the good Lord did some good work when he put you together. See what I'm saying? Beautiful. And again, the group here with Grant Green, John Patton, Ben Dixon. Cool. So that's the Blue, Lou, Cool, Donaldson era. All 10 of those titles are, to me, incredible Blue Notes that Alfred Lyon loved dearly, along with the Grant Greens and the Jimmy Smiths and all those other things that were happening at Blue Note. The stuff that everyone's so worried about collecting, that was stuff Alfred himself was more on the fence about. He's like, I don't know, Jackie, that's a little bit edgy for me. You know, I think the Jazz Messengers had a lot of freedom. I think he really trusted Art Blakey and loved Arthur a lot. And him and Arthur seemed to have a really good relationship. So Blakey seemed to be able to do kind of what he wanted, but Blakey never pushes the envelope too hard in terms of dissonance. There's some elements of that when Wayne Shorter steps into the picture as the main arranger composer, but the Blakey stuff is always more about tempo and aggression and velocity and integrity. And those Jazz Messenger records, I don't think he ever allowed any of those cats to step to the microphone and play a solo unless they were ready to bleed. You know what I mean? And he's renowned for having pushed his bands and drove them and saying, you can do better, play harder, play faster, play cleaner, play more from your soul. Blakey stuff's very integrally filled with honesty. And I think Alfred was like, yeah, Blakey, you do your thing. I trust you. But there was no question that Alfred Lyon had real hesitation with some of the stuff that was happening. Herbie Hancock, The Egg, the Donaldson Cool, some of the stuff coming out was like Cecil Taylor, and for understanding reasons. Some of that stuff's a little bit difficult, and that's not what Alfred Lyon was ever about. So if you want to be cool, like Alfred Lyon, if you understand what Blue Note was, it's very easy from today's perspective to think Blue Note was all this avant-garde stuff. It's not. The avant-garde stuff barely sold. It was kept afloat by all the other things that Blue Note did. Blue Note was definitely hard bop central, 56, 57, 58, but by 59, 60, there's deviations in that trunk. And the main thrust of Blue Note's sound, and the thing that is linked to swing and rhythm and blues and early rock and roll, it's all of this stuff. This stuff's not that far from Louis Jordan. This stuff's not that far from the advancements of Ray Charles and all the great things happening even with James Brown. Smooth, cool, melodic, swinging, spiritual, moody. That's the Blue Note sound. And when you think about the resurgence of Blue Note in the UK especially, the acid jazz scene, a lot of it was this easy to groove to stuff that kind of re-put Blue Note on the map in the 80s. People wanted to dance to these cool records with conga players. It's so cool, it's so hip, and yet we overlook it because we all want to be so cool and have the really rare, expensive Blue Note that I heard on YouTube yesterday that cost $7,000, but look at me, I have it. And there's not really bad Blue Notes. If I had to pick my least favorite Blue Note, it'd be Cecil Taylor and Unistructures, easily. Easily. Then there's some other late stuff that I could do without. It's good to have it, to understand the scope, but it was always something that Alfred Lyon kind of balked at. He was always a bit like cringing and he was known to have stock takes at times. Like, yeah, don't think that's quite the direction I want you guys to go with this. But he never had to interfere with Jimmy Smith. He never had to interfere with Lou Donaldson. When Lou was doing the cool, Alfred was back there doing his little dance that I've seen some of the brothers imitate. And the brothers loved Alfred. They loved Frank Wolf, the photographer and partner. The brothers loved Al and Frank. Those were important people in the black jazz community. They were held in high esteem, and when they were making black-centric music, Alfred was never happier. Never happier. And so for all these people out there who want to collect Blue Note and talk about Blue Note, this, Jimmy Smith, Stanley Turrentine, the Three Sounds, Grant Green, the R&B side of jazz, that's what Alfred and Frank were about. And if you listen to what's happening in jazz in the early to mid 60s, the new thing with Coltrane and Impulse, Blue Note's not in any rush to follow that. There's things happening. Mingus doing stuff at Candid that's just filled with dissonance. Monk's doing some pretty crazy stuff. And even as we get into the late 50s, early 60s, Miles starts doing some stuff that's stretching the boundaries of the fabric. You know, Sketches of Spain, Porgy and Bess, these things are stretching the sounds of what jazz was about, and sometimes actually stepping off that stage and being in the orchestra pit with other sounds. Jazz does have its limitations as to what jazz is. But the Blue Note Cool, that's the heart, the body, the meat, the soul, the potatoes, the entire meal of Blue Note is this. These little seasonings and spicings that Grasham Mancour and Herbie Hancock and some of these other cats made, those were to be enjoyed by those who liked a little extra. But for the main company, this is what the music was about. And it's just kind of sad to me, the condescension, the overlooking of the Turrentines and the Ike Quebecs and all these cats, Three Sounds, Jimmy Smiths. I think I'm going to take credit for something, and maybe I shouldn't, but I feel like over the last 2 years, I've sung the praises of the Three Sounds so much that I've actually started to see a change in how people value the Three Sounds. And I'm sure I'm not the only reason, and I'm sure people discover the Three Sounds on their own before me. But even in the Facebook groups, I'm seeing more and more people really proud to have Three Sounds and to have found those old Three Sounds records and to show them on their Facebook groups and to think that they're valuable. And they were very much overlooked 3-4 years ago when I was first talking Blue Note on the internet. I was always disturbed how people didn't seem to care about these great Three Sounds records. I'm like, these are so awesome. This is fantastic stuff. And I definitely have seen a change. Even some of the other YouTube people, they're talking about the Three Sounds a little bit differently in Gene Harris. And I don't want to take too much credit, but I do feel like I've helped change that perception to some degree. And that's awesome. And that's not me patting myself on the back. That's just me saying I'm glad people are finding the value in that music because it's out there. It's not super expensive. You don't got to break the bank for an original Three Sounds record. And you can have one for $20 and understand the sound that Alfred Lyon loved. Alfred Lyon was all about that. Read the books. Read about the sessions. Read about what Alfred Lyon loved. It's that stuff. And you can look at the records that Lou Donaldson makes and all the records that Three Sounds make and Jimmy Smith makes and Stanley Turrentine makes. Those guys get dozens of records sometimes. And a lot of the avant-garde things, you get one, maybe two. Or Dolphy, 1 record. Cecil Taylor, 2 records. Ornette Coleman, a couple of live things at the very end. Donald Cherry here, a couple things. Stanley Turrentine? Yeah, you could go ahead. Track that. Go ahead. Jackie McLean? Oh, we're going to sit on that one, Jackie. We're going to put that aside. There's a reason why a lot of those avant-garde, edgier records didn't get out right away. Some of the Lee Morgan stuff, they got sat on. But there's a lot fewer of the Three Sounds and Turrentine and Lou Donaldson sessions that got sat on. They were always that money. That's Gravy Train, baby. I can make money with that. I can sell that to people. I can put a 45 of that in a jukebox in the Chocolate City, and it's going to do something. It's going to make some noise. And then Prestige, of course, was also embracing some of that same stuff over where they were doing their stuff in New York. And so the soul jazz at Prestige kind of dovetails with the Blue Note Cool. And I wouldn't say they're the same. There's a little bit of difference to the sounds, even though they definitely crossbreed and intermingle a lot. But Blue Note Cool, Prestige soul jazz, that's the heart and body of those black music, blues and roots, the church, the gospel. It's all in that music. Early rock and roll, early rhythm and blues, or old swing, it's all condensed into that soul jazz Blue Note Cool sound. And all of the other branches that are happening in jazz, most of those branches were small and withering and didn't have a lot of life to them. And it's so been flipped today because of the rarity of that stuff. It's made them collectible and expensive, and thus has elevated into people's minds how necessity those records must be and how I need to have them so I can show off my copy. And I just think enough's enough. Enough is enough. You don't always have to have the weird record by a group that didn't sell. Pink Floyd. It'd be akin to people all collecting Pink Floyd More and Pink Floyd Umaguma and Pink Floyd Saucer Full of Secrets. And everyone would be like, look at my Saucer Full of Secrets. And granted, it's a rare record, and it definitely can be expensive, especially for an old Tower pressing, early American pressing, or early EMI, British pressings. Those rare Pink Floyd records are cool to have, but if you're all throwing up your copy of, look at this, I got Saucer Full of Secrets, Pipe at the Gates of Dawn, look at this, cool, I got a nice pair, cool. And no one's talking about Wish You Were Here and Dark Side of the Moon and Animals in the Wall. There would be some Pink Floyd historians going, you're kind of missing the greatest stuff that Pink Floyd did. I love metal. Umaguma's got some fun moments. I'm always down to set the controls for the Heart of the Sun. Saucer Full of Secrets has some moments I really enjoy, especially when I was doing LSD. But if everyone on the internet's all going, Saucer Full of Secrets, Saucer Full of Secrets, and no one's saying Dark Side of the Moon, you've all missed the Pink Floyd story. You're just talking about the fringe on the jacket. And that's what's happening with Blue Note. We're talking about the fringe on the jacket. The elements that were experimental, less popular and successful, but have become highly sought after and desired because they're rare. They're getting reissues. People are talking about that publicity. Tone Poet has a name that rings out right now. So Tone Poet reissues, everyone's talking about, oh my God. And not to take anything away from Tone Poet or what they're doing, I'm thankful. I've got, 15 of them myself. They're filling in some of those gaps. And they're doing some of the easy to enjoy stuff as well. The Sonny Clark stuff's fantastic. The aggressive hard bop stuff. There's a lot of great Blue Note stuff that's still going to be issued. But there's a reason why they're not putting these ones out. These ones are out there. And these are the Dark Side of the Moon of Blue Note. These are the Wish You Were Here's of Blue Note. So dig your cool Lou. Dig it. I'm going to wrap this up today. The podcast is out there. It's now available on Apple and on Google for those who want to use those apps to listen to the podcast. So you can listen to me ramble while you're driving or walking or whatever you have. There's lots of great merchandise in that merchandise store, including some new podcast hoodies and t-shirts. So please check that out. I appreciate your support. All my Patreon supporters, thank you guys very much. Much love to you people. Those of you who find value in the channel, feel free to go to the merch store or the Patreon and help out and donate just to help keep this channel going. It's a time-consuming thing. I got a lot of things going on now between DJing, trying to get this coffee shop going, working on this house itself for the basement. There's just things happening. And so we're trying to get all that done. Of course, I still love making these episodes. They're really fun for me. It's a nice way to express myself, and the community I've gained through this channel has been invaluable, especially through the lockdowns and the pandemic. Having people to talk with and message and interact with and laugh and chuckle, and once in a while get annoyed and angry with some people because some of the dumb things, being accused of being a racist. That's some of the most ignorant things and I didn't need to have everyone tell me I wasn't a racist because I know I ain't. I just thought it was ridiculous that someone would even go to that place. So anyway, I appreciate you all. Y'all be safe. Y'all have a great day. I'm be off in the city this weekend. If you don't hear from me when I respond to messages on the weekends, it's because I'm in the cities, an hour and a half away from home. I don't always have access to internet. I'm busy and I'm tired. I'm DJing. I got things going on. So if you don't hear from me in the weekends, if I don't respond to your comments on Saturdays and Sundays, it's because I'm not home. I will usually try to catch up during the week with comments, but sometimes it just gets to be the Miles Davis stuff we talked last Monday. Got a lot of comments, like over 80, 85 comments on that. And that's great. I love that kind of interaction and dialogue. And there was some interesting stuff happening in that dialogue. I think most people kind of came from a similar camp as me, as how they felt about some of the Electric Miles and the Electric Bird for that matter. But again, appreciate you all. Y'all be safe. Talk to you soon.